Good evening. My name is Audrey Lawton Evans, and I am the chair of the Houston Black American Democrats, also known as HBAD. Before we get into tonight's important message, I want to thank all of the protesters, change makers, and allies who have been out on the front lines, some behind the scenes, and everywhere in between in this fight for justice. I would also like to thank the Harris County Democratic Party and Chairwoman Lily Schechter for partnering with us to help amplify our voices as we work together to eradicate systemic racism and all forms of oppression towards Black people in our country. Lastly, I want to thank our sponsors, many of whom are on this call and who have answered the call to put their money where our cause is. Tonight, we are excited to bring you this very important and very necessary conversation. You are going to hear from some of the brightest minds and fiercest advocates in their fields as we tackle issues of social justice, anti-racism, and police brutality. But we are not just going to talk. Tonight, we are going to do the work necessary to put our words into action. At the end of tonight's presentation, you will hear from Ms. Elizabeth Johnson with HBAD. You will hear a call to action, and she will outline ways in which you can contribute your time, money, and resources to this movement. So now, I want everyone to take a deep breath and prepare yourself to open your minds and listen with intention as we invite you to a seat at our table. So, without further ado, I will introduce our moderator for the evening, Mr. Camaya Marshall. Many of you may already know him and the important work he has done. He currently serves as the Director of Strategic Communications for Vice President Joe Biden's 2020 presidential campaign. Camaya, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here this evening with all of you. Thanks for tuning in for a great dialogue and conversation. I'm glad to be your moderator tonight. Again, I'm Camaya Marshall. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications for Vice President Joe Biden. I am actually an alum from the Texas Southern University, so I'm very familiar with Houston. And so let's get this thing started this evening. I want to introduce our great panelists, starting with Dr. Howard Henderson, who's the founding director of the Center for Justice Research and Professor of Justice Administration in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs at the Texas Southern University. Go for it, Dr. Henderson. All right. And I have Dr. Henderson coming on. Well, next we have attorney U.A. Lewis, who's a civil rights and police misconduct attorney with the Lewis Law Group. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I am U.A. Lewis. I am a civil rights attorney here in Houston, Texas, and I practice in the surrounding areas in civil rights, police misconduct in particular. I want to thank everybody for being able to join us today and being interested in this subject that has been so near and dear to many of our hearts for so long. And I just appreciate everybody coming to the party and coming to the table. I want to, I hope that this dialogue today can just help with the steps that we're planning on going forward in making a change, and as it relates to police brutality in Houston, in particular in Harris County.
Excellent, excellent. We're going to go back now to Dr. Howard Henderson, who is a founding director of the Center for Justice Research and Professor of Justice Administration in the Barbara Jordan Mickey Leland School of Public Affairs. Take it away, Dr. Henderson.
Looking forward to having a great conversation tonight. We must be strategic, we must be deliberate, we must be intentional. I'm glad to be a part of this discussion. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Next up is Dr. Melanie Price, author and endowed professor of political science at Prairie View A&M University. Take it away, Dr. Price.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I think it's been great to have conversations, a lot of conversations recently about the power of protest and disruption in seeking transformational change in society. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
So as you see, we have a great lineup of panelists tonight. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So I think it's only fair to start the conversation off with social justice. And this first question will be towards Dr. Henderson. And that is, and any of the panelists, feel free to chime in as well. Dr. Henderson, in your opinion, what does social justice mean?
Essentially what social justice means to me, and there are varying definitions and degrees of this, but essentially what it means is to be treated equal, to ensure that all the constitutional protections are afforded to you as they should have been from the very beginning.
Okay. Anyone else wants to chime in on what does, to them in their opinion, what does social justice mean?
I think for me, social justice is really about sort of the collective project that we are engaged in to ensure that everyone gets to access the full rights and responsibilities of American citizenship. And we, as people who are social justice minded, want to be thinking in every aspect of our lives, whether or not we are engaged in fair, in free, and in equitable behavior and equitable policies towards everyone in society.
Okay. While we're talking about that, and we're in this movement in this country right now, let's just do a deeper dive. This second question is directed at you, Dr. Price, and that is, what is equality versus equity? What is the difference?
So, equality is really about whether or not people actually get fair treatment. That is, whether or not people are treated the same. So that's one way of thinking about it. But equity is really about whether, not just whether or not people are treated the same, but it's really about whether or not our social structures are in fact allowing for equal outcomes. That is, are our laws, are our policies set up in a way that doesn't discriminate against a particular group? Is there a way in which the culture and structure of your corporation, for instance, it doesn't matter how equally you think you're treating a person, but does your corporate structure allow for African Americans, for Latinx, for queer people to actually do well in that environment, right? So if you say we're all about equality and equity in our corporation, but you only hire people, say, from Harvard Business School, and you say, well, we get anybody who's available from Harvard Business School, but we know that they have a very low African American, low Latinx, low Native American population. So you're always going to end up with lower numbers of those groups, right? That's about a structural problem. And equity is really about addressing those kinds of structural problems that we tend to blame on individuals, right? So equality is about the individual in many ways. Equity is about the ways in which we think about our rules in society and whether or not they actually allow for people to be treated equally.
Yes. I think I want to hear this from everybody and all the panelists. So I guess we'll start with you, UA Lewis. Your thoughts on that question.
Equality versus equity, to me, I think it's been lost along the way because we have been sold this idea that we have been equal for all this time as Black minority people in the United States, and the equity has not matched what we've been presented to as equality. So I think that now we're finally taking notice of that. Not that we haven't before, but actually putting action to the notice that we're taking to that. So that's something that we've always needed and something we'll continue to need and always have to push forward on, as far as I'm concerned.
Dr. Henderson?
Yeah, we can, split hairs on the difference between equality and equity. And essentially, To me, equality is the action difference that is expressed between people in the goal of seeking fairness. Equity to me is essentially proportional representation, but at the end of the day, I think they both are getting at the same issues. One is about institutions and one is about individuals. The overall goal to me is make sure that everyone is treated fair across the board.
Those are all some really solid perspectives and responses to that. I guess we'll go to the next section of this, and this is something, as we're in this movement right now, that police brutality is something that is not new, but I guess more so since technology it's very in our face now. And the country, I think this is going to be something ongoing that's happening. So this next question in this section of this conversation, we're going to be talking about police brutality, and this is going to be directed at Attorney UA Lewis. And the question is, what are the methods we can use to eliminate police brutality?
Wow, that's a really broad question, but I'm happy to voice my input on it. Obviously, this is what I do. This is my practice area with civil rights and police misconduct in particular. I think that it's important that first is make sure that we bring people to the table that have been involved in this from the beginning. And I think that it's important that we do talk to people like myself that has been involved in civil rights, police misconduct in particular for so long. And we can make strides in that way. I know many great civil rights attorneys in Texas that have a lot of knowledge in making change, like Deborah Jennings and Randall Callanan, and there's so many, Joseph Plumbar, and I just think that those people need to come to the table, and I've talked to them. Andre Evans is also another person who actually was a police officer, and now he's a civil rights misconduct attorney. And what we've thought about and talked about was different ideas, like, and I mentioned some of these things that might sound new to the masses because they're not in the trenches and finding out information. Because remember, as civil rights attorneys, we've been in the unique position to actually do what a lot of people have been asking for permission to do. For example, we're able to investigate these deaths. We're able to bring people in via subpoena and put them under oath and find out information. So we've been doing this for years. So we have a lot of information. And so we need to be brought to the table so that we can share this information. I almost feel like I'm finally at the principal's office, and I get to tell on everybody that's been being disruptive in the class because I know so much information, but nobody's ever asked us as far as publicly. Now, with that being said, what we've come up with is a few things. And one thing that I think we can all agree on is that there needs to be strong psychological support to the structure that we have now with the police department. There needs to be evaluations of officers before hiring them, and even after they're hired and in the police departments. We need to be able to weed out those that join because of their need for authority versus those that join based on their need to just genuinely want to help people. We also need to take the use of deadly force very, very seriously and make sure that there is serious discipline to match that. If an officer has used deadly force on a person and it was not reasonable and it was something that that should not have happened, then there should be very serious discipline. And it should include termination, like we've finally been seeing lately. Also, whistleblower protection for those who are witnesses, who are officers, who want to actually step in and stop the abuse, but don't have a avenue, a way to do that. And I think that we need to get this whistleblower protection in place so that they can be shielded from their own liability for not stepping in, because there is liability for not stepping in. It's called bystander liability. And you, as an officer who does not step in to stop another officer from police abuse, abusing and brutalizing a citizen in the public, you can actually be sued for that and be liable yourself. And since we're talking about liability, I think this is a perfect time and place that we bring the insurance lobby into this and have them to play a role in requiring that police departments make their officers have liability insurance. Liability insurance is a really, really easy fix to what we have now, because what liability insurance essentially ends up doing is kind of like with you and your car. You have too many accidents, guess who doesn't get insured? Well, that's the same with the use of deadly force. If you have too many incidents, you won't be insured, or your insurance costs would be so prohibitive that you would not, no department would pick you up anymore. So it can kind of be, it's something that can solve itself. It's an issue that can solve itself. In addition, we've talked about the fact that whenever there is a deadly force, use of a deadly force in an incident, that a mandatory police screening, drug screening of the police officer take place. We have so many people with CDL license. If they're in an accident, they're rushed off to the drug center to get a test to see what is in their system, whether it be alcohol, street drugs, or an abusive amount of prescription drugs. That's something that we can do today. Also, the licensing. Every professional and paraprofessional that is licensed through the state of Texas, their discipline is attached to those licenses. Whether you're a barber, a nurse, a doctor, or a lawyer, and if you have some discipline, then your license shows that, and your license can be suspended or even revoked if the discipline is is necessary and it's to protect the public. And that would also help with, the whole, what they call, it's kind of derogatory, but gypsy cop syndrome, where you have these officers that are allowed to resign as opposed to being able to, be terminated or what have you. They just kind of hop from agency to agency. That's something that will also be helpful as well. I could go on and on about this, but these are some of the things that myself and these other great attorneys have talked about. And I think it is very valuable because there's so much more that we know that we could share to help kind of push everybody else, add a piece to the puzzle to help everybody else get to where they're going, to try to detour this police violence that's been going on in our communities.
That's great. I mean, that was pretty thorough response. And I think that this is a hot topic right now. And so I think we should actually hear from all the panelists on that. And that was a great foundation to that. So Dr. Price, in your opinion as well, what are the methods we can use to eliminate police brutality?
I think UA Lewis really gives us a really great sense of the kinds of of the things we can do right now. But I think it's also important to talk about how ingrained law enforcement is in the brutality of Black people, right? If you look at every major incident, if you think about Tulsa, or if you think about Rosewood, if you think about every lynching that has ever happened in America, it was either done with the full participation of the law enforcement in the area, or they watched and didn't stop it, right? And so there is a long history of law enforcement protecting the people who brutalize us, or being the people who brutalize us, rather than being the people who protect us, right? This notion that we can get back to some good old day when the police actually protected Black people is the first thing we have to stop thinking. This requires a complete and utter rethink thinking of what law enforcement is in African American communities. When we were property, law enforcement for us was making sure that the white people who thought they could own people could get us back. When we were in Jim Crow, law enforcement meant making sure that whatever a white person said we did, that we were punished for it. And so it's really important to think about not just what kinds of ways. So we can't think about whether or not we should go back to community policing. We can't think about whether or not we need to figure out some plan that has happened in the past. We really have to think about how we're going to refocus the relationship between Black people and law enforcement agencies. There is no past plan that is a good plan. There are only cases of moving forward. That might be something like, for instance, what would it look like if police had to live in the communities that they policed, right? What would it look like if police officers had to have requirements where they spent non-policing time in the communities where they where their beat was, right? So there are many cops, there are many police officers who only enter certain parts of the city when they're fully armed, when they're in their police cars and they are looking for criminals. They are not there to protect human beings. They are not there to make sure that people feel safe. They are there looking for suspects. And if that is the only way you enter African American communities, then you're going to find only criminals. And so we have to figure out other ways for these police officers to know and understand the lives of Black, brown, and other kinds of underserved communities.
Wow. I guess next we'll hear from Dr. Henderson on this as well.
Yeah, I think Attorney Lewis and Dr. Price hit it right on the head, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think there are some strategic moves that can be made that have been shown to work before. One, you got to figure out how to track the problem, right? So we need a national and a local database where we understand exactly who's doing it, how they're doing the extent to which they're doing that. We also got to demilitarize the police, right? We got to retrain and provide an opportunity where we usher in a new notion of democratic policing that we've never seen before, as Dr. Price noted. She also mentioned this whole notion of changing police culture. We have to envision something that we've never seen before, and that's going to take a long time to do that. But also, we got to begin to focus on alternatives to American policing, because again, what we're asking for, we've never seen. But there are two pieces that I want to note that are very important. Number one is we got to deal with police unions and we got to deal with qualified immunity. We have to totally dismantle those protections that allow for the propagation of continued subjugation of African Americans at the hands of the police.
Very, very true. Wow, that was pretty powerful, but we're not done. Let's go a little further. This is something that that's been a hot topic for a while now, but I want to hear from, and we'll start with you, Dr. Henderson, on this. What does defunding the police mean, and what would that look like in Harris County? And how would the money be reallocated doing that? So first, I know that's a long question, but again, what does defunding the police mean, and what would that look like in Harris County?
Now, even in this whole conversation of defunding the police, you see inherent racism, because there's a group of people who are arguing that defunding really means totally getting rid of the police as we know it. There's another group that's saying, hey, listen, we are about reallocation of resources. The onus is on that individual to define it the way they want to define it. But I think it's a very interesting conversation that we need to have, because we need to talk about how resources are allocated to the police. If that means defunding, that's what that means. But in a democracy, we should be able to decide what that looks like. Now, what that looks like in Harris County, what that simply means is we figure out, number one, how many police we actually need to do the job. Number two, where those police are necessarily needed at. But number three, where else can we properly allocate resources that would be more effective than traditional social control policing as we know it.
And that same, in your opinion, how would the money be reallocated? How does that look to you from a county standpoint of things?
Well, I think, number one, we use resources to support and increase the bandwidth of juvenile services, because we have a lot of kids who are being ushered in that path. We understand the pipeline issue. But also we have mental health issues that we need to deal with. If we boost our educational system, we understand the history of Harris County, Houston's educational system. So juvenile services, mental health support, education based. I think the whole notion should be to move money toward prevention more so than responding to issues as we see.
Got it. I guess we'll move on to Dr. Price. I think you may want to add to this part of this question. And again, that question is, what does defunding the police mean? What would that look like in Harris County? And what would how would the money be reallocated? In your opinion, what's your thoughts on that?
Sure. So when we talk about defunding, we have to understand city budgets, right? Budgets are moral documents. They tell you what you prioritize in the place where you are making that budget. And in many cities in America, the police take up half of the city budget. More than schools, more than healthcare, more than hospitals, more than streets, more than housing, more than anything else. And if that's the thing that you spend the most money on, then that's obviously the thing that's most important to you. And so because they have the most money, they end up also being social service people who show up to places where mental health professionals would probably be better served. They show up to places where children probably needed somebody who was adequate and able to deal with juveniles. They also end up in places where they should never be, like schools. Like, we don't need armed cops in elementary schools. And so when we place our money on in only the police, then crime is the only thing we talk about. And so defunding the police means what we'll do is we'll take those cops out of elementary schools. We'll take those cops out of schools and we'll put in counselors, nurses, we'll put in therapists, right? And so if we're putting in those people, then the need for the police become less, right? The need to have those police there, if anybody thought so, becomes less, right? We shouldn't be handcuffing 5- and 6-year-olds as we've seen on social media. And so when we say defund the police, we mean stop letting them have so much of our city's money. Give that money to things we actually need, like dealing with the problem of people who are unhoused, like dealing with the needs of children. And if we can do those things, then the police will find themselves less needed than they are right now, right? We are creating the conditions of criminality and then hiring more police. We are not treating children, like children, instead like criminals. And of course, you need more police than that, right? So in Harris County, one of the things that we could do is take some of that money away and have mental health facilities and clinics in elementary schools and in middle schools. We could take some of that money away and create with our local emergency services, we can have mental health units that also get called out when we call 911, right? And so there are lots of things we could do with that money that we don't have to have police in order to do. Because when we put police in predominantly white schools, they protect those children. They treat them like children. When we put police in schools where there are predominantly children of color, we police those children. We treat those children like criminals. And so we don't need police in the business of raising our children. We don't need them in the business of helping people who have mental health difficulties. We really just need them to do their job. And these things are not their job, even though we seem to want to pay them to do it.
Wow. I mean, the answers I just heard on that is something that I wish the nation would take heed to and listen to and understand.
It's 8 o'clock.
Excuse my computer talking, but the nation needs to hear more of that. I think a lot of folks are confused on that conversation when it calls for defunding the police. Okay, moving on, we're gonna go to our next section, and that is anti-racism. And clearly, again, as I've said multiple times, as we're in this movement right now, racism plays a major role. And I think things are just out loud right now, which is a good thing. And so the first question is, what are the responsibilities of non-Black individuals in combating racism? And we'll start with Dr. Price on this question.
Sure. I think the thing that all of us who are African American, who are people of color, probably experienced right after George Floyd's death is that every white person who was a friend of ours checked in. I don't know if they got a message. I don't know what happened, but they're like, hey, are you okay? I got that message over and over and over again. And in the end, the thing I told them, because they're my friends, is that sure, I am okay. But also it would be much better served if you ask the people who, I'm sorry, I hear feedback in my own computer. I don't know if it's me, but it'd be much better served if you ask the people who are the actual people who are racist. Are they okay? Are they okay with the thing that they're actually doing? And in this country where our systems are set up to make people of color seem less than, it is virtually impossible. The only way you can be non-racist is if you're actually actively engaged in it. The only way you can be anti-racist is if you're actively involved in being it, right? So that means when you're a lone person, are you treating the loans like they do for Black people all the time, where you give us a predatory loan, even though we could get a normal one? When your children and you interact with Black people and brown people, is it because they're serving you your food at a restaurant, or they're cleaning your house, or they're cutting your yard? Because then what you teach your children is Black and brown people are the people who serve you while you live life. And so there are all kinds of ways that we can engage in anti-racist behavior, but a lot of that is about whites talking to other whites about their behavior. Black people are pretty clear on how racism works. They're pretty clear on how anti-Blackness works. They're pretty clear on how xenophobia works. They're clear on those things. They don't need to be educated on those things. But in fact, the people in your own lives, in your homogenous communities that are all white, those are the ones that you need to call out when they're on Next Door Neighbor or whatever other app, and they said, telling everybody, I just saw a Black guy walking through this neighborhood, be careful. Do you check that? Right? When you move into a house and there are Black people next door to you, do you talk to them? It's those kinds of things where white people really need to be in conversation with each other about checking each other in their own racism and in their own bias.
Yes. Wow. Okay. I want to hear from everybody on this. So we'll go to you, Attorney Lewis. What's your thoughts? And I'll read the question out for you again. What are the responsibilities of non-Black individuals in combating racism?
Well, I think that what their responsibilities what I would ask them to take responsibility in is just being the voice in the room. You know, make sure that you're protected. If you really are an ally, be that voice in the room when we can't be the voice in the room. Make the people that are racist uncomfortable, even as though somebody that is Black or brown is in the room. Don't let them have a comfort or a safe place to continue the racist attitudes or actions when you're around. That is what I would say would be a responsibility I would put on somebody that wants to actually be an ally. If you see somebody that is allocating certain resources for only, the majority and keeping them away from minority individuals or Black and brown individuals, then speak up, and let them know that it's not okay. If you hear them saying things about Black or brown people, speak up. If you see somebody at an establishment, a business that is discriminating, call them out as though you yourself are a Black or brown person. That's what I would ask of somebody that would consider themselves in the fight against racism.
Excellent response. And also, Dr. Henderson, what's your opinion on this? What are the responsibilities of non-Black individuals in combating racism?
Unfortunately, most of the responsibility lies in their court. I mean, you think about it, we still have separate Americas, right? Black folks have black conversations around black folks, and white folks have white conversations around white people. Hispanic folks have cultural conversations around Hispanic people. Until we get rid of that, until we can have a conversation like this, and there are people of other ethnic groups who don't get offended when we say what we say, we're going to have these problems. There's a facade, right? And if you look, the conversation that we're having now, black people, there need to be white people in this conversation. There need to be Hispanic folks in this conversation. We got to get rid of this separatism, because we need to be comfortable with being offended about what people think about the way we see the world. We got to quit playing games. I mean, it starts at the top. In corporations all over this world, Black people have a similar reality, and we express that when we meet each other. But no one looks at that. We're all focused on the police, and we should be. But can you imagine how many bosses and administrators in jobs doing the same thing every day to people, and they can't fight? So until we destroy the facade that this is only exists in certain places, we're going to have this problem, and we need people to fix that.
Wow, everyone had valid answers on all the questions, and especially this one. One thing I will add is I expressed to my close friends in my inner circle, like the ones who are not Black, like, look, guys, I would rather you be very upfront, very forward, very honest, because it makes things a lot better. It makes it very easy. I think it's very healthy as a society to talk about race, good and bad. That makes us grow. And so I'm loving these answers. These are conversations that need to be had more. We have a question from one of our audience members from Facebook. Brittany from Facebook just asked, how can we teach anti-racism at home? It's a great question. Who wants to take that? Go for it, Dr. Price.
Yeah, I think one of the things that children learn more from, not from what we say to them, but how we live our lives. And if you are a person who does not have any friends who are of other racial or ethnic groups, right? If your children never see them, then one of the things they might learn from that is that these people are not, they might interpret that as these people are not welcome in our home. Do your children have toys that are multicultural? Do your children have books that have people of different kinds of races, right? And the thing that we know is that white people in particular spend a lot of time in racially homogenous communities. That's much more difficult for Black people, for brown people, for Asian people, for them to do that. But whites in particular are more likely to go to an all-white church, are more likely to live in an all-white neighborhood, are more likely for their children to attend all-white schools. And when they do, what is the lesson they get from that? That somehow the people who are out there are not part of us. And so it's difficult to be friends with people across racial groups, right? Especially in moments like this, right? Where you are actually dealing with the vestiges of histories of racism in the past and of racism in the present. And so you have to have really hard conversations. And also the thing that we need to understand is that people of color talk about race a lot. Like, you could just be at Thanksgiving talking about race. You could be in the gas station talking about race. White people have a luxury that they don't have to do that. And so if you're going to be friends with people of color, if you're going to teach your children about racism, if you're going to be anti-racist, then you have to talk about race a lot. You cannot leave the narrative up to your children to figure it out. You cannot leave the narrative up to yourself to figure it out. You have to actually do a lot of talking so that the friends that I have who are not Black, I don't sugarcoat my opinions about things with them, right? And I don't ask them that they sugarcoat their views about things with me, but you have to be willing to take it. And you cannot expect me to then say, not you though. Not you, white friend, just everybody else. I'm saying things, you're saying things, but that is how you deal with racism. That's how you overcome it. But white people have to really understand that that requires a lot more discussion about race than they have probably ever had in their entire lives.
I think that's you put it very clearly. You know, I think one thing I'll add to that is, like, look, race is not an easy conversation for others. It's easy for African Americans, and I think people in color in general. but particularly being Black, it's going to come up in every conversation. You're probably going to talk about it every day. I don't think a day goes by where I'm not talking about race or my culture or how I was brought up, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's something that, one, you have to get comfortable, get uncomfortable, and get comfortable at the same time when talking about that. But it makes you better. It's just like a challenge. Those challenges, these kind of conversations make you better. So I think that's something we have to, and it starts as a child. Putting your children around other people, seeing other people, doing different things, different cultural things. Just exposure matters. Exposure matters. Even in this moment right now, as folks are at home, we have a lot of resources available. Whether you're reading a book, whether you're doing things online, whether you're talking to your neighbor, or I don't encourage people to do too much. They need social distance, but at the same time, things are out there, but it's up to us to do those things, and up to those people that are non-Black to do those things.
Camaya, can I also add, I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I also add to that before coming back to Prairie View, which is my alma mater, 18 months ago, I spent my whole career at predominantly white colleges. And when you would ask white students whether or not they had spent any real time in a place where they were the only person, they were the only white person, most of them said no. Had they spent any time in spaces where they were in the racial minority? Most of them said no. And I can tell you every month I do something where I'm the only person, only Black person there. Sometimes where I'm the only woman there, right? And so part of it is that you're gonna have to put yourself in places that are uncomfortable for you and learn how to live in it. Not talk about the fact that you're the only person in there, not expect us to change the narrative because you're the only person in there, but really learn how to live in spaces where you are not, you have to decenter your whiteness. You have to take it out of the forefront of what it is you're actually doing. So do you spend time in places where you are in the racial minority, where numerically you are outpaced in terms of who's there? Because that then changes your outlook. And do you do that without expecting everyone in there to acknowledge your whiteness? Because that's also taking up space.
I would also add what you can do in your home is make sure your children know that it's not tolerable to be just a racist. Just flat out, it's not tolerated in our home. We do not do this. My daughter, when she was a little girl, came home from school one day and she said she hated Mexicans. And, I let her know from the moment that came out of her mouth that is not acceptable in our home. And I made her explain to me where she got that from and why she's saying that at the same time, because we nipped that in the bud immediately. And that is something that if you see in your home, you have to make sure that you take care of it. And if you have somebody that comes around your children, whether it be your parents, grandparents, whoever it may be, let them know that they are not allowed to talk that way in front of their child, as though you wouldn't let them talk about, speak in profanity around your child. Be just as aggressive as stamping that out immediately as well.
I will say one thing, experience I just experienced is one of my white friends, as all this is happening, sent me a text and said, Camaya, I remember coming to an all Black event and I was the only white guy there. And he had never experienced that a day in his life. And I mean, the fact that he had the guts just to bring it up, when it happened, he was there, he acted normal, but he told me, wow, I understand being a minority because he's never experienced that. So he was just by himself, the only white guy in the room for about an hour. But that experience for him, just to hear his real feedback on that, I say, brother, that's almost a lot every day for us in some cases. And so those things like that are very impactful, important. And I encourage, again, folks to step out of their comfort zones and to experience other things. Okay, we're going to go to the final question here. And this is to each of you. And that is, are there any books and or podcasts that you recommend for further reading about all of these topics? Please dig in.
I think one of the best books, and I mean, we're going to come up with a lot of books to read because this issue's been with us for a long time, right? But I think that the more we can read about understanding what's going on psychologically, if we can read books like Intellectual Warfare, if we can read books like Up from Slavery, we need not forget the experience, but we also need to understand the psychological dimensions that we're dealing with, because race has transformed into, on a certain level, subconscious. And we need to be able to deconstruct that, because, I mean, essentially you're talking to people who have never experienced real freedom about what freedom actually looks like. And so even our conversation is biased to a certain extent.
Any other folks want to give other recommendations on books, podcasts? Please chime in.
Sure. I mean, I think right now, one of the historical periods that I think might be most of interest to us in this moment is looking at Reconstruction, which happens right after the Civil War. And so if you can find books like Black Reconstruction, if you can find books like that deal with that era of time, I think that would be useful. I think it's also important for us to read up on things like the Civil Rights Movement to get a better understanding of what it means to organize. But there are also lots of books coming out now that have to do with Black Lives Matter. So Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor has a book from Black Freedom to Black Lives Matter, or something like that. I'm sorry, I didn't expect this question. Otherwise, I would have known it exactly. But I think there are lots of things to read. I think so many people are publishing really wonderful articles right now that have to do with race, that have to do with history. And so if you don't want to read whole books, you can find really great things that are coming out right now in places like the Atlantic and other sites. But I also think, for me, I'm a documentary person, and so I love documentaries. And so you can go, your local PBS, your Netflix, they all have popped up all of a sudden with these Black Lives Matter sections, with these and I would encourage you to watch the documentaries in particular, but don't just watch the documentaries about Black suffering, right? Because in this moment, the tendency is for us to focus on Black suffering because we are in a difficult moment right now. But the thing that we have to understand is that out of Black struggle, there comes both transformational change, and there comes joy, there comes art, there comes culture. So watch something maybe like I Am Not Your Negro, right? About James Baldwin. I think those kinds of things would be good.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think it's pretty popular at this point, but I think it's important that everybody grab The New Jim Crow. It's an old book, but it's still relevant now. And I would encourage a lot of, if you're really interested in this, there's some people that you need to follow on social media that can be very helpful in getting you some information. I agree with all the documentaries. I love them too. And I actually been watching a documentary on Reconstruction. I'm very much in agreement with that recommendation, because I feel like we could learn a lot from the Reconstruction period. Also, the people that I would say to follow in some of the podcasts would probably, there's a website called the Marshall Project. They are absolutely amazing. And I think that it's important if you visit that site from time to time, if you're really interested in a community and getting information on change. I would follow some of the activists like Alicia Garza. She's one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. If you follow her Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, Tamika Mallory. Also, there's, I think he's pretty popular at this point, Sean King. I think people are probably already following him, but they give a lot of insight on what's going on when the mainstream media will not. I think, there's this podcast called Thorough Line that is pretty good. And I watch all NPR, I listen to all NPR, and I would suggest NPR be on your dial saved as well.
Okay, we're going to hear from Dr. Henderson some more. Go for it, Dr. Henderson.
Yeah, one more thing don't want to forget. Oftentimes we look at old books, we forget that we all need to get copies of the daily newspaper. because in that newspaper is information that you're dealing with right now. You cannot forget that, because you would be so focused on the past that you forget how to connect that to what's going on in your community. And that's going to tell you what's really going on right now, combined with the books of the past.
Adding to what Dr. Henderson said, as a person that deals with the media and strategy and communications, I encourage folks to watch their local news, watch their local newspapers, get those Black newspapers, get the national newspapers. You have to dissect everything, read everything to give you a broader perspective. It's really, really important. Not only listen to your national outlets, but those local outlets and local influencers as well. It's really, really important. Right now it's more important than any time at least since I've been alive. And so I think it's really important that we are paying attention to all the things that we have in front of us. But again, local news, local influencers, your national outlets, you're going to hear that. And if you want to do a deep dive on different things, The Atlantic, someone mentioned that. Those are some great write-ups on deep dives on different pieces, hearing from some real credible people. So lastly, I said that was the last question, but I lied. So please excuse me for lying. And I'm going to go back to the truth here. And that is, we're going to do closing remarks. And within these closing remarks, I ask each panelist, and I will answer lastly of this, how do we channel our energy and our thoughts into next steps and actions? In short, where do we go from here? Again, I'll say that again. How do we channel our energy and our thoughts into next steps and action? Where do we go from here? 1 minute, please, everybody.
I say that that we understand that this is a marathon. That we cannot let our momentum stop. We have to continue doing everything we do, full speed, full throttle. We cannot let up and press the gas on the momentum that we have now. Everything that we're doing, we have to keep it going, and that's important. That our next step is our last step. We have to continue to move to step over and over and over again towards the progress that we're finally, it looks like that we're reaching. I'm very optimistic about what's going on. I'm so proud of the young people. And you know, I feel like my generation let you guys down, but I really am so proud of what you guys are doing. And I think that we just continue just to support one another, and don't waste your time explaining to people that don't get it or don't care. Move out the way if you're not here to help, and you know, just continue doing what we've been doing.
Dr. Price?
Sure. I think UA Lewis is right about the fact that this is a marathon. To be Black in America is to be involved in a very long civil rights struggle that never ends. And so, but also it means that everybody can do their part. And so if you're a person who can't march, right, for health reasons, for work reasons, then can you offer up some money to organizations that are working, because they need that money right now to bail people out of jail, to pay for resources, to do all kinds of things. Can you call your congressman? That's pretty easy to do. Can you do things that are within your power to enact change? Can you talk to your relatives about why these things should be important? Can you also make sure that people who are out on the front lines who are doing this work, that when you see them, you say thank you, that you acknowledge the work that they do and how important it is. But also, I think it's important to understand that protest also comes along with voting, right? So what we want to do is we want to protest, we want to be in the streets, and then we want to vote. Those things, I don't know why people seem to think those things are combative, that those things are in conflict, but they are not. Black people have always protested, and when they were able to, they also voted. Those things go together.
Dr. Henderson?
Yeah, I think the more immediate step needs to be voting, right? I mean, we can't say that enough, right? We got to vote for people who understand the needs that we have today, but we also have to be strategic. We're kind of all over the place right now, and that has its role, but we need to identify what our agenda is and all have a focus on that agenda, Because if we don't do it, we're going to spread ourselves thin. We need to make sure we know what we want to do, what the objectives are, how we get there, and then once we get there, figure out how to make that getting there sustainable.
I completely agree. I will add to that by saying, look, stay engaged, get engaged, talk to people. It's so important more than ever now to be engaged and to vote. I know it sounds so cliche, but no, it's seriously vote. It's a really important thing right now. I don't know how to, well, I know, but as a person and on a personal level, it's really about all of us, and it's going to take all of us in this election. You know who we have in the White House. You see who they are. You see their races, they're lying, they cheat. So it's important that we have to, our biggest tool is to vote. They don't want you to vote electronically, and we want to do vote by mail. There's so many different things happening. Pay attention to what's happening. Pay attention to what's happening. Volunteer, engage on multiple levels, the local levels, the state level, and the national level. It's important. All of it is important, especially locally. It plays a major role. So please vote. I don't know if we want to end it right here, and I want to pass it over to Audrey, who will go over next steps, and we'll go some more from there after Audrey.
All right, so what a wonderful panel discussion. I want to thank all of our panelists for coming out tonight and being engaged and giving us so much useful information. I want to thank again our sponsors for this evening, who have made it possible for us to have this conversation. And I want to thank the Harris County Democratic Party for partnering with the Houston Black American Democrats to bring this forum to you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit briefly about checklists for what you can take, how you can take action to create lasting change. You can support local Black-owned businesses. You can read books on anti-racism and racial justice. Register voters, become a VDR. Tell at least one friend about what you learned today. Subscribe to a social justice podcast. Join a protest march. Of course, wear a mask and social distance. Volunteer to contact voters with the Harris County Democratic Party and with the Houston Black American Democrats or a local campaign. You can support HBAD. You see the link that has been provided below. You can register to vote, and you see there's a link for Vote Simple, which is www.votesimple.org. And last, but certainly not least, you can vote on November the 3rd. There's more information on how to cast your vote, how to get registered, and where to vote at www.votetexas.gov. And we're also asking if you have a moment to sign our petition. It is the Petition for Justice at www.harrisdemocrats.org/petition.
Thank you so much, Audrey. One last thing I'll add is that the way to get active is, go to www.joebiden.com. Please find an event near you, make calls, get involved with your Democratic Party there. We're deeply on the ground. We plan on doing a lot of work in Texas. We are hiring a lot, so we want everyone to be engaged. But again, go on the website to joebiden.com. You can sign up to volunteer, make phone calls, find local groups within your community, and also within the Harris County Democratic Party as well, and HBAC. So please, that's the biggest thing from us. And again, I can't stress this enough. We want to win this thing. We want to beat Trump, and I feel pretty confident about beating him. Every day he's pretty scared right now. But our thing is, don't pay attention to the polls. Organize. It's going to be very, very important to organize. Don't pay attention to those numbers. It's going to take all of us. We are coming in here as the underdog. So we want folks to organize and engage, and don't take this thing for granted. It's going to take all of us, and we're going to have to come out in mass numbers, period. We'll have a brief moment of silence as we remember those killed at the hands of the police. Okay, thank you for that.
Since 2013, 14 unarmed people have been killed by police in Houston. So we're going to say their names. The first is name withheld by police. Richard Scales, Patricia Spivey, Regina Nicholas, Jose Centeno Jr., Danny Ray Thomas, Ulysses Valladares, Roderick Ronell Taylor, Peter William Gaines, Frank Shepard III, Jason Lewis, Hallis Kinsey, Jordan Baker, Noah Burford Silva. And I have extra names that UA Lewis has added: Michael Blair, John Allen, and Aviel Brazil. Justice has only been served for only one of these cases.
Audrey will close us out. I think we had a great panel discussion tonight. Thank you for everyone for joining. We got a lot of great feedback so far. But I'll leave it to the leader here, Audrey.
I just want to thank everybody again for attending this evening. Black Lives Matter. And we need to continue the conversation. We need to continue the work. Please support, of course, the Houston Black American Democrats at www.houstonblackdems.org. And please go vote November 3rd for Joe Biden for president.